'cause my love waits there in San Francisco.
Greetings from Castle Goring, from Mickey, Aurora, and from me. Well, to those of you who want to know, Treasure is much better, but I think I need to prepare myself for the fact that Treasure is not going to be with us forever. So, more than that I don't want to say, but hopefully he's going to have a little time left. Fingers crossed, a year or two, maybe even 3 or 4, but I doubt it. So, he's 17 years old, so he's had a good life, and he's very comfortable, and he's not in pain, so I'm going to have him limping along as long as possible, as long as he's got a good quality of life. So I'm not a great believer in euthanasia, I have to tell you. So putting that aside, I will plunge right in with some news from Silicon Valley. A friend of mine who has contacts in Silicon Valley has been in touch with me to update me on Harry's position vis-a-vis a better-up. Evidently, Harry is in serious meltdowns because it looks as if Alexei Robichaud is not going to be renewing his contract. And this is going to create problems or Harry's worried that this will create problems for him vis-a-vis his immigration status, which of course they're already looking into. There's even an act called the Spare Act to see that Harry is treated equally along with every other foreign applicant for a stay in the United States, and that Harry has not had the law waived for him. So he's sensitive, evidently, to the fact that he can do without further instability and further pressure. And there is pressure because, evidently, BetterUp is moving from its operations from California to Texas. Texas is evidently a lot more user-friendly corporately than California. And the remaining staff at BetterUp have been complaining about the living conditions in San Francisco, and they don't like what's going on in that city, which I have to say is a great pity. I've only ever been to San Francisco once in the 80s, and I thought it was beautiful. Well, I dare say I left my heart in San Francisco is something from the past, because evidently people are desperate to leave San Francisco and take their hearts and everything else with them, which just goes to show what destructive governmental policies, whether it's local or national governmental policies, can do to a formerly vibrant city. But to continue with what I have been told about Harry, BetterUp is moving to Texas, and evidently Alexei Robichaud is very eager to divest himself of a connection with Harry as quickly as he can do so. And this, as I say, is causing Harry some concern. And I gather that Harry is hoping that he can be kept on, if only in a face-saving capacity, but also in an immigration-saving capacity, whether it is as an occasional, almost part-time zip-in associate of the company, which I would imagine, if I know anything about the corporate world, is going to be the first port of call before total severance. So, oh, poor Harry. The problems just mount up. But I gather that Alexei Robichaux is very aware of the fact that he thought it was being very clever to hire Harry, and Harry would put him on the map, and it would get a load of investors, so that when they had a float, that the company would be able to float for much more than it otherwise would have floated for. And it's not working the way they anticipated, because Harry's reputation has tanked, and along with it has tanked the motivation to have Harry as chief impact officer of Better Up. I have a naughty little thing to share with you as well before I turn to the questions. The Milfy says, whatever that is, just 2 words: in Griftus Games. I thought that was rather droll, don't you? And now, Ms. Sparkles and Glitter says, when I watched the trailer for Heart of Invictus, I was absolutely disgusted how number 5 once again viciously attacked his family with lies. I understand when people say that forgiving is not forgetting, but in certain circumstances I believe forgiveness is not possible. King Charles will likely forgive his son, but if Prince William decided not to forgive number 5, he should not be blamed for it. I would not forgive number 5 either. Well, Harry's negativity and dramatics, and Harry has always been, I tell you, a drama queen. He got a lot of lessons in how to be a drama queen from his mother, and his wife has perfected this skill. And nothing with Meghan, I am assured, can ever be plain and simple and sedate. It's got to be at full fever pitch. It's just fantastic. It's the most fantastic and the most fabulous and the best. And everybody's taking us against me. And it's not enough that she is worried that she took a dive when she was at Birkenhead. And it's not enough that she's concerned that the press might actually begin to do arithmetic. And it's not enough that she then honors her commitments to the Mayhew Centre and going to the Cirque du Soleil at the Albert Hall that evening. It's not enough. She has to have been curled up in a ball, in a fetal position, in agony and anguish because of what the press was doing to her. Well, of course, no such thing happened. And we now have Harry, having taken a leaf out of her book, stating that he was in a fetal position, traumatized by what had happened in Afghanistan. But I'm going to get to that because the army has counteracted that claim. So, if I can get to it in a second, I will first of all read out 2 comments and then delve into, because one of the questions is a perfect lead-in for actually incisively covering this latest farce and invention. Coffee break theology says he thinks the forces are having fun to impress their families. Surely I must have misheard that. Or did he let it slip that all he did was play computer war games? Yes, you didn't hear wrong. You heard right. I think, in fairness to him, we can stretch a point and say that what Harry was trying to say was to motivate the severely injured veterans who are partaking of the Invictus Games opportunities, that he was, let's be benevolent and say he was trying to motivate them and make out that the games are going to be fun and that and that any success will impress the families of the veterans. Well, certainly they would move the families of the veterans. So I don't want us to be too particular and punctilious and critical. It behooves one in life, I think, to try to understand the spirit of what somebody's saying and not nail them down on the detail which they might cack-handedly have got wrong. So let's give him, let's cut him a bit of slack there. However, did he let it slip that all he did was play computer war games? Very observant coffee break theology. And PQR says, Lady C, the Queen's phrase, recollections may vary, springs to mind every time Harry or his wife open their mouths. One of the army top brass has also just said that, but I'll get to that in a second. I'd be very interested if you could share with us the 3 most brazen of Harry's misremembrances, as you have so elegantly put it in the past, from his Netflix infect us self-pity fest. Oh gosh, I tell you, you guys are too much. Netflix infect a self-pity fest. Oh gosh. Oh. Sorry. Okay, here goes. And I took notes. Harry makes the claim that there was no support and no one to help him when he was suffering from post-traumatic stress after he came back from Afghanistan, having killed 25 Taliban, of which I'm proud. They were just chess pieces on the board. Well, he needs to make up his mind. If he has such emotional detachment that he regards them as chess pieces on the board, and in any event, as one of the top brass has just made clear, Harry was nowhere near operations to get involved to any degree that could have triggered post-traumatic stress disorder or syndrome, what are we left with? We're left with Harry saying, I didn't have that support structure, that network, or that expert advice to identify what was actually going on with me. And then he says, painting the picture, poor Harry. I was curled up in the fetal position on the floor. I was emulating Meghan with Meganian histrionics and dramatics, and I'm still doing it because I'm a good boy and I want those PJs. And actually, I don't anymore. I don't like her giving me PJs or anything else, but we've got to pretend that we're still happy. Crazy. Madness. Totally. Nothing adds up. However, the reality is, in 2017, Harry stated in an interview that William had helped him following their mother's death. He told Bryony Gordon, who is a very pro-Harry Telegraph writer, in her podcast Mad World, that Prince William had encouraged him to get therapy. I'm going to quote Harry. For me personally, my brother, bless him, he was a huge support to me. He kept saying, this is not right, this is not normal. You need to talk to someone about stuff. It's okay. He also told somebody who told me that William was on his case when he came back from Afghanistan as well, that he really needed to get help because his attitudes, conduct, etc. were not normal. He also, in his post-factual remembrances called Spare Me, he spoke about his former private secretaries, Jamie Lowther Pinkerton and Ed Lane Fox, and how they had the knack of getting to the heart of things, and they had encouraged him as well. And they gave him care and concern. Well, which one is it? Harry, you got no help since you have been Meghanized. But before you were Meghanized, you got help from many sources. As for his claim that he never ever even cried after Diana died, even Paul Burrell has waded in, and I have no doubt that in this regard we can listen to what he's saying, because he states he had every support he could possibly need. I was there. He soaked my shirt with tears. I understand from people who were there at the time, and I'm not speaking about Paul Burrell, I'm speaking about people who were not employees, that Harry definitely cried and that Harry definitely got support. So, he's been Meghanized. Next claim. Harry said the UK media ignored stories about British soldiers who were wounded in Afghanistan. And according to him, he said, I was angry that the media weren't covering it. Another Meghanization. Well, of course, Meghan doesn't do Google. That's why she never knew who Harry was. And Harry can't do Google either, because if he Googled, the most simplistic of inquiries would have revealed that there was tremendous coverage, because the British military deaths and injuries in Afghanistan were extensively reported upon. They were front page news on a regular and frequent basis. The news was promulgated from official announcements published by the Ministry of Defense, which provided photographs, tributes from commanding officers, etc., etc. To this day, the BBC has 136 UK troops who died listed on their website. According to the former Royal Marine Ben McBean, who lost an arm and a leg in a landmine blast in Helmand province in 2008, he was only 20. And according to Harry, he was one of the people who influenced and inspired Harry to create the Invictus Games. Well, Ben has taken to Twitter to shoot down Harry's false claims, because he says, still love Harry, but again I have to disagree. Not sure what media he's on about, but I know the British media did cover veterans for years. He also said, I've had his back for 15 years. I've always championed him, but it doesn't mean I have to agree with everything that comes out of his mouth. On this one, the Duke of Sussex is wrong. One of the only positives post-injury was how the media supported the troops. They didn't write us off and told the world about us and our disabilities. Do we begin to get a picture of Aurora, wake up and bring some Coke. I think we need somebody to get inspired. I need to drink Coca-Cola. I wonder who else resorts to Coke as well, and whose brains have been fried. Ayahuasca, 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 ayahuasca. I'm channeling your mommy, and she says that she's very proud of all the truth we're telling. Because really, we need to make money, and we've got to tell lies, speak the truth, so that we can be constantly in the newspapers and get attention on a daily basis, and maybe get all sorts of things from Netflix so that maybe they can inflict us with the Invictus Games and ruin the reality, which is the courage and the nobility of those injured veterans. Andy McNabb, the SAS hero and author, says, to claim media outlets weren't fighting for our injured servicemen is offensive and rubbish. But now wait for it. Richard Dannett, the former forces commander, Lord Dannett, who actually I've met, his he was involved in a charity that one of my son's godmothers raised a lot of money for. He echoed the Queen's comment. I say, recollections may vary. Then he said, being kind, I would say that Prince Harry's recollections are not as clear as they might be. He may recall the support he and William gave to Help for Heroes in the early days, given it was launched on the 1st of October 2007. There is no doubt that Prince Harry, returning from his deployment to Afghanistan with injured soldiers, brought a fresh focus to the sacrifice many families made. But his comments and that focus were one amongst many. Richard Dannett, how dare you? Excuse me. Harry's the only person who deserves credit for anything. But anyway, his comments and that focus were one amongst many, and there had already been a shift in public support for our service people. Well, those of you who saw anything about the coronation ball that we put on here might remember that we were also raising money for Care for Veterans. Harry, Harry, have another spliff. Blow whatever is left of your brains. I'm going to quote from Colonel Richard Kemp, the former commander of the British forces in Afghanistan, who said that Harry's constant media sniping at his family was turning servicemen and women against him. It certainly has done. I have had the great pleasure of receiving here one of the true heroes of who is alive today, a Falklands Island hero whose name will remain nameless. But he is a revered figure, and he was one of the first people to tell me that Harry had blown it, and that Harry's, well, I'll quote Richard Kemp because let's put the words that came out of his mouth. Prince Harry enjoyed enormous popularity with the armed forces, both for his determination to serve in Afghanistan on 2 occasions and also for the help he gave to wounded soldiers, partly through the Invictus Games. Unfortunately, he has blown most of that away now. A combination of him turning on his own family, the royal family, which means such a lot to the armed forces, and his attempt to exploit his own service for his own publicity purposes. We only need to think back about what he said about how he killed so many Taliban members a short while ago in his memoir Spare. What Harry was doing was fighting and wait for it, here we have it. Harry was fighting at a very, very remote distance. Not the kind of thing, in my view, that would result in serious stress or post-traumatic stress disorder. There we have it. The only ball Harry curled up in was a drugged ball. He needs help. His disconnection from reality and his nastiness and his rewriting of history in such a flagrantly destructive way. He needs help. And if he is unwilling to get help, we need to be rescued from him. Last claim. He complained that the British press ruined his deployment to Afghanistan. No, they didn't, Harry. In fact, the media in this country diligently kept quiet about your 2008 tour. Your cover was blown by the US website The Drudge Report with a world exclusive about Harry the Hero by Australia's New Idea. Now, New Idea is a magazine that it's actually serialized one, I think maybe two of my books from the early 90s. And the Drudge Report, well, Harry and Meghan had to go to America to flee from the attentions of the British press. However, the British press didn't leak this. Also, Harry and Meghan's claims that they had to flee from the United Kingdom to protect their children against the British press, when the British press don't bother their children, but the children get more attention from the paparazzi in America, where there is no protection. Does this begin to give a picture of how totally disordered this man's take on facts is, and how you can't rely on a word that comes out of his mouth to be factual, which is hardly surprising, because I tell you, I have cousins and friends who blew their minds on drugs. And I'm here to tell you, Harry's mind is blown the way your nose gets blown when you have a bad cold. Now, Nalita Skiretta says, Lady C, good morning to you and your beautiful fur babies. Thank you. I do hope your sweet cat recovers from its illness. Well, he's much better, but I don't think the prognosis long term is great. But we will keep him comfortable and alive as long as possible. And I tell you also, what I have learned is, as a pet is declining, it gives you an opportunity to strengthen your relationship with it, to give it all the love and attention that when it's healthy, you don't necessarily give it. And you ease it out in the gentlest and kindest and most loving way. And my experience has been that one of the most important things you can do is give anything or anyone you love a good death. So, if I may now cease from interrupting myself and continue, I do have to disagree with you on one point about the veterans. I am a veteran. I also lost my youngest child, my daughter, 2 years and 8 months ago, and I know what grief is. It lives with me every day. I have also been told I am too kind for my own good, but I will say now, if I were one of the veterans at the Invictus Games, I would either turn my back on her or walk out altogether. The only thing that might keep me from doing that would be my desire to honor all those who stood beside me. If those veterans remain there facing her, it's not out of kindness, it is self-discipline. The total self-control these men and women are taught from basic throughout their military careers. Oh, and the speech Harry gave that you read out, My youngest daughter, who just turned 23, could have written a much more moving, thoughtful, encouraging speech than the one he made. Thanks for reading the comment of a proud veteran and grieving mother. My pleasure. Frex and Specs says, Lady C, what do you think about the situation over H's visa passport in the US? I feel it needs to be cleared up if he's on a private citizen or diplomat. H is busy fiddling around in our politics, so it's crucial to be transparent. True or not, the current optics are a UK prince is attempting to impact American sovereignty with King Charles's approval, since King Charles allows Harry's status to remain ambiguous. It really is beginning to appear like King Charles actually approves of Harry's actions. Well, actually, my understanding is that the king has nothing to do with Harry, and at this point wants to have nothing to do with Harry, and that there is absolutely no interaction between the two whatsoever. But that Harry is an adult, and Harry is plainly a damaged individual. And it is not up to the king to enforce American laws for Americans. It's up to the American authorities to enforce their own laws. That is why the Heritage Foundation has queried Harry's status, and that is why that congressman from Florida, whose name escapes me at the moment, has introduced the Spare Act, so that Harry will not be able to get away with preferential treatment because he and his wife breached royal protocol and helped to get the Bidens elected, which is what he did. And whether you are a Democrat or a Republican, it should concern you that a foreign prince is interfering with the constitutional liberties of your country. Because it doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. If Harry manages, with the support of other people on the Aspen Institute, to get the First Amendment trimmed the way they want it trimmed, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, your mouth is going to be tightly sewn up. People need to wake up to what's going on and understand this is not party political. This is of national interest to Americans, and it is of international interest to the rest of us. Because they say America sneezes and the rest of the world gets a cold. I don't think we want a cold, and certainly not a cold that makes sure that our mouths are tightly sewn up. Let us see what happens, because the mere fact that all of this is going to be trundling through the courts means that there is some movement and a light is being shone. Whether successfully or not is beside the point. A light is being shone on preferential treatment for elitists who are trying to interfere with the Constitution of the United States of America. It's serious, but it's not the king's place. He's not American. It's Americans' place to deal with it. You don't like what Harry's doing? Boot him out. That's right. You have a choice. You don't have to host the viper. You can kick it out. Sunshine Water says, if you want an enemy for life, attack their child. I heard this recently and I totally agree. I cut a friend out of my life after she viciously attacked my 3-year-old daughter. I let her know in no uncertain terms to stay away from my children, and she did. I suspect I know what you're alluding to, and I tell you, you're right. You're right. I know from my own personal experience. I had a problem with a friend of mine whose drunken behavior was causing huge problems for us. And I tried to handle it delicately, but she didn't only try to spite me, she tried to spite my children, even though she had known them all their lives and they were teenagers at the time. And I told her, I said, I can forgive you, possibly, for what you have done to me, but I will never forgive you for what you tried to do to my children. I said, our friendship is at an end. And since then, I have refused to see or speak to her. I have only on one occasion been in a room with her, and I made sure I didn't even look in her direction. And when I inadvertently spun around and she was trying to catch my eye, I made sure she didn't catch my eye. And we have a mutual friend who for the last however many years, it must be 15 years now, she's been trying to get me to soften my approach. Never. Because the one thing you don't do is try to attack someone's child. That is unforgivable. And I think we know who we're speaking about. And does she hope or expect to ever be forgiven? Well, of course not. She didn't do anything wrong. I mean, the child's fat and a monster. I mean, not like my best friend's adorable daughter. Of course you're never going to forgive it. And it also shows you the measure of the person and that they are beyond redemption and they are beyond association, and you must never have anything to do with them ever again. That's my take on it, and I know that's someone else's take on it as well, and I'm glad to see that it's your take on it as well, Sunshine Waters. Dorothy Grace says, greetings, Lady C and your first babies. So nice to meet Treasure this week. Thank you. He actually walked into the room and I thought, well, let me incorporate him, so to speak. And I'm glad I did. I'd begun to think that he wasn't quite himself, and it turns out he wasn't, but he's been dealt with and hopefully he's going to, well, he is a bit on the mend, but enough of Treasure. I heard an American say that Meghan's mock bow, she bowed, not a bow in her hair, was more offensive to the British people, whereas the Americans thought little of it, that Americans bow to nothing since the Civil War. I would be interested to know how that mock bow would have been received in Jamaica and your thoughts of her nonsense. Also, does the fact that royal obeisance was removed from Wimbledon some time ago, was that because American contestants objected to the practice? As always, love hearing your news. No, there has been a gradual deformalization of etiquette where the royals are concerned. At one stage, it was obligatory to curtsy if you were a woman and to bow if you were a man. And in the last quarter of the last century, things began to loosen up. And I mean, the Queen, for instance, did not insist on people bowing to her or curtsying. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story that happened. A friend of mine called Marissa Masters. She was a great character. She was Italian. She had been married to Lindsay Masters, who was the financial genius behind Haymarket Press, with Michael Heseltine, who was the Deputy Prime Minister, Conservative Prime Minister. And Marissa was at Windsor Castle once, and she was presented, I think is actually the correct word to use. She was presented to the Queen. And she said, and she was very eccentric, Marissa. She had very short cropped hair, no makeup ever, caftans, but not exotic caftans, sort of greyish caftans. But she was lovely. And she said to the Queen, "Sorry, Majesty, I don't genuflect." The Queen said, "That's perfectly all right, Mrs. Masters. I'm not Jesus Christ." Marissa used to tell that on herself and how quick the Queen was. I mean, she did all, though. I see she by and large didn't particularly mind it, but she liked when people curtsied. She felt, it was endowing her with the respect that she felt she had earned, and she had earned, as most people in the world would agree. But she used to also be quite funny, because the Queen used to say, "Oh, every time I see Mrs. Blair, I can see her knees are stiffening." Because Cherie Blair, Tony Blair's wife, who was, of course, a socialist and too left-wing to ever curtsy, but she used to sign the visitors' book at Balmoral, Cherie Booth QC. That is Queen's Counsel. Oh dear, you really do have to laugh at people's inconsistencies. So, no, I think it just loosened up. Now, insofar as Jamaica is concerned, the average Jamaican likes the monarchy. The average Jamaican liked the Queen, they liked the Prince and Princess of Wales, they liked the King. They don't really have any feeling one way or the other for Camilla, because they really have had no contact with Camilla to speak of, which is as it ought to be. But if they had more contact with her, I'm sure they would grow to like her. But the average Jamaican is relaxedly in favour of the British royal family in Britain. Depending on how empowered they are by the Black Power movement and how radical they are in terms of a blackness, they might take the view that Jamaica should sever its final ties with the monarchy while remaining within the Commonwealth. That to for them to be fully grown up Jamaicans, they can't have a British sovereign as their head of state. I understand it. I am actually totally neutral on this issue. I'm not really that well qualified to speak in terms of what my attitude would be had I stayed in Jamaica, because of course, A, I didn't, and B, people like me have mixed with royals all our lives. And so we would be more predisposed to the monarchy. So I'm not really 100% sure what my attitude would be, but I suspect I would be fairly neutral, because actually until I started writing my royal books, I was not particularly pro-monarchist. I was not particularly pro-Republican either. But I suppose if you pushed me, I would have said, oh, well, I suppose I agree with the Empress Elizabeth of Austria and Queen Elizabeth of Romania, and maybe republicanism is the more appropriate form of government nowadays. Well, they had those beliefs in the latter part of the 19th century. The 20th century has come and gone. There have been the downfall of many monarchies, and the freest people in the world with the highest standards of living and the safest constitutional protection all or mostly reside in constitutional monarchies in Europe or the United Kingdom. So I have belatedly, as a result of the knowledge I have gained writing about the royal family, come to realize that many of their purposes in life have accidentally almost been achieved as a result of representing all the nation as opposed to just a political party, because you needed sufficient republics in the 20th century, especially former monarchies which became republics, to see the contrast between an elected president and an unelected head of state who is born to the role, trained for the role, embodies the role, and lives his whole or her whole life within the role. It's obvious if you look at the prosperity of many of the former monarchies in Europe that they flourished far more greatly with a monarch than they have done as republics. It is also obvious if you look at other countries such as Brazil. Brazil was at its most stable and prosperous while it had its emperor. As soon as it became too prosperous for the politicians and they wanted to divide up the spoils amongst themselves, they abolished the monarchy, since when Brazil has been on a downward trajectory. So, I hope that answers the question. And we are going to wrap up with something from Doña Senorita, who says, what are your thoughts on the Rubiales business? Okay. Luis Rubiales, to those of you who don't know, is the head of the Spanish Football Association, who was extremely exuberant and was kissing all of the winning players and kissed one of them on her lips. And she was then showing very jokingly and proudly the kiss to her friends, and she actually lifted him off the ground. It was obvious to me, who I don't actually like being touched by strangers, and I certainly don't like being kissed by people. I don't even like being what I call manhandled, and I am notorious for when people move in for a kiss, I put up my hands and say, COVID kisses, COVID kisses. Because ever since COVID, I am no longer air kissing. The last time I air kissed was at Dan Wooten's 40th birthday party, and I came down with the most dreadful cold that lasted for the whole month of March. So I'm sorry. I think that one's immune system got compromised during COVID by not being exposed to sufficient germs. So I now like to keep a comfortable distance. But even before that, and when I was happy to air kiss, I have never liked people touching me or kissing me or taking what I would call liberties with me. However, there are situations where people blunder and you take their intent into account. And it's happened to me, and I have not been offended. I have understood, and my feeling on that situation is that it is obvious he was thrilled to bits that his team had won, as he ought to have been. He was clearly proud of them. Have we reached the pass in life where somebody can over exuberantly display affection and enthusiasm, and it is misconstrued and twisted into an assault? I'm sorry. You know, there is a huge difference between an assault, which is a hostile act, and an aggressive act, and genuine, exuberant affection. I think, yes, he got carried away, but are we as women now so pathetic and so mean-spirited that we want to have a man's career destroyed because he kissed one of us on the lips in a moment of exuberance? And she clearly was equally exuberant because she lifted him in the air. Has he complained about the fact that she violated his space and lifted him off the ground? No. And this is my opinion. I'm not going to change it, and I don't really think it's a fit subject to be debated, because I think who disagrees is entitled to disagree. This is my opinion, and I'm not changing it. And I was asked the question, and I am giving the answer because it concerns me that a man's career can be endangered by the misinterpretation of joyousness and a genuine affection. it's really a sad world that we live in if people are punished for even inappropriate exuberance and joyousness. I think a bit of understanding is called for in a situation such as this. And who wishes to disagree is absolutely entitled to disagree. This is my opinion. It's carefully thought through, and I am not going to enter into a debate about this. But I thought it was important enough to mention, and I'll tell you why. I have seen other instances of people doing something that was positive and somebody spins it to something negative. I remember many years ago, we were at a pub. The children were young, and we were sitting outside, and I was with a friend who was actually a great friend of Oliver Hawes, incidentally, and several of that set. And she was staying with us for the weekend. And the adjoining man, the man at the adjoining table, objected to something, I don't remember what. And she said to him, she said, oh, you know, we didn't mean anything by it, or whatever it was. She touched his arm graciously to say, see, I'm harmless. He jumped up. You have assaulted me. I'm going to call the police. At which point I intervened and said, go right ahead. I said, I've never seen such bad behavior in my life. Of course, he didn't. But this is another situation which, you know, there's not sufficient kindness in the world. We need to encourage kindness. We need to encourage affection. We need to encourage positivity. And I'm afraid discouraging it by twisting obvious demonstrations of positivity and affection, no matter how misplaced, are not the way to do it. That's my heartfelt opinion. And on that note, I will say thank you very much for listening to this. I hope it has been of some interest to you. Please keep the questions and comments coming in so we can speak about what you want us to speak about. Okay? Thank you so much. God bless. And if you have truly enjoyed this, please like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and Godspeed. Bye-bye.